Let's do this. The Cult of Hockey podcast by the faithful and for the faithful. I'm David Staples of the Edmonton Journal, and I'm here today with Bruce McCurdy. Hey, Bruce.
Hey, David. How you doing tonight?
Well, I was feeling a little bit. Every time I look at outside at that gray sky, and then I look at the forecast, we have minus 20 coming up on Thursday, Bruce.
Oh, man.
I'm so sick. This is the, I think this is, I think it's the 10,000th day of March today. This is the 10,000th day that we've suffered through this horrible, the most horrible month. And it's not been made any better by the weather. But Bruce, I went out for a walk. I like to go through the U of A experimental farm.
Right.
And it just improved my experience immensely. It was just nice to get it. You got to dress for it. And I was listening to an audio book, and I just had a great walk. So now I feel a lot better.
Yeah, I went for a walk myself today through along the St. Albert River Valley, and cold and gray, but you dress for it and you move along and you stay warm. And I listened to old Cult of Hockey podcasts about Ken Holland because I was researching a post that I'm writing on Ken Holland. And I thought, what did we say about him back at the time, and how wrong were we then, and how could we cover that over? But we actually did, I think, pretty good. I think they held up really well, those podcasts.
Well, we tend to be optimistic, right? And it did work out.
This time, optimism actually seemed to be warranted, and we discussed a couple of the moves that I think we're going to discuss on this podcast, so we can get back into that. And anyway, it improved my mood, even though what is today, January 89th? That's what my calendar says.
It's February 11,000th. It's just, anyway. Bruce, it's we on those years, because we are pretty much glass half full kind of Oiler fans, and on those years when the Oilers do well, we appear to be clairvoyant. So one out of 10 years, we look like hockey sages. We predicted this team was going to be good, and they're good.
Toot.
All right. Today you're starting your season in a review series, and you're starting with a look at Ken Holland's work. And you started it on Friday night with the first post on the Oilers as a team as a whole. So now you're looking at Ken Holland, and today we're going to do two good things, two bad things, and two numbers on Ken Holland. And because it was such a good winning season, we're going to do two good things each. Bruce, what's your first good thing about Ken Holland?
Oh boy, yeah, I wasn't planning on it coming out quite like this, but yeah, my favorite of the moves that Ken Holland made, and we kind of had to thumb wrestle for one of them, and you won, so that'll come up right away. But I'm going to go with a kind of a gutsy move that Holland made on June 30th when he chose to buy out defenseman Andrej Sekera. And that was not a popular move among Oilers fans. I looked at the Twitter Reacts post that you wrote on that day, and Holland was getting excoriated pretty good from a number of people for that move, for buying out the Oilers' top defenseman certainly by the payroll. And yet the move did what it was supposed to do. It broke a huge logjam on the Edmonton defense that had the same potentially starting six defensemen for 2019-20 that had played in the playoffs in 2016-17, which was great, but then was intact for two more seasons when the team was poor defensively. And yet still all those guys were under contract, and there didn't seem to be any space for the younger guys that have been bubbling under for a couple of years. And by doing this move, it sucked for Andrej Sekera fans, and I'm one of them. But in doing the move, Holland did create some cap space. And this is what happens when you bring in an outsider to run the team. He can take sort of a clear-eyed look at things and without sort of any personal ownership in this deal or that deal. It's how do I deal with this situation where practically capped out. I got to sign a few guys. How can we do it? And by buying out Sekera and getting $3 million in cap space, he then had to replace Sekera on the blue line from within his organization, which at the time we thought maybe Caleb Jones had the inside track on. It turned out that Ethan Bear won the job right from the beginning of the season. And either way, you're talking about a $720,000 contract. So with the move, it freed up about $2.3 million that wasn't there before. Even after having replaced Sekera with Bear, which I would argue in retrospect was an upgrade on the defense this year. Then he had a little bit of money to go out and sign a few of these $1 million caliber class players that he subsequently signed. And some would pick and choose and say, well, he wasted all that money on Mike Smith, or he spent it all on Alex Chason, who did get a nice raise from the previous year, but it wasn't $3 million worth of raise. And it just gave some flexibility. But more importantly, really to me, is the fact that it gave those young defenders a shot. And first of all, Bear got in, and then of course Larson got hurt, and then there was a little more room. And they tried Joel Pearson for a while, and then eventually, about mid-November, Caleb Jones got in pretty much to stay. And William Lagesson got his games in, and before you knew it, the Oilers had like 4 different guys classified as rookies who were getting ice time on the blue, including one who became a go-to top 4 everyday defender in Ethan Bear. So I think it was a move that was made with the long view, and Ethan Bear covered the bet quicker than anybody could have guessed it would be covered, but it worked out very much for the better. Are you on mute?
There we go. I'm saying if the Oilers, if the Oilers could have traded Chris Russell, they would have done so, but they couldn't. I don't think I think he has no movement clause or no trade clause. He had a no trade clause. I think he'd go to 10 teams this past summer. And I remember the narrative being put forward was that Sekera might have lost a step, and I honestly didn't believe that. Well, I mean, he had lost a step, but he had lost a step and couldn't keep up. He wasn't capable of playing in the NHL. I didn't buy that, Bruce. I was actually early on, before they traded Sekera, I was not in favor of it. I liked his game, and I think it was proven out. I think he was a strong player on a really strong Dallas team. I think he played in the top four in Dallas.
He started in the top 4, and then he gradually worked his way down to the third pairing, and they had one of the young fellas surpassed him, and he was 5th on the team in ice time, even strength ice time, and he only had 8 points in 50-some games. He was solid, but the fact was he was no longer a $5.5 million defenseman. He was
he sure was
role-playing defenseman, and that's how basically Dallas paid him. Was $1.5 million for 1 year with bonuses, which he's earned about $200,000.
Yeah.
But Edmonton, even if they kept half of his cap hit, whoever took him would have got 2.75 times 2 years to go, and there just was no market for him. So the buyout was just you had to take your medicine and move on.
Oh, I agree. I agree with all. Like, by the time of the trade, and when the trade happened, I had gotten my head around it. I believe, you've listened to the old podcast. Maybe I'm making this up, but I do believe I had got my head around it. And the advantage that I saw was the point that you've made. It was readily apparent that the Oilers had some young defensemen who were ready to bust in. Caleb Jones, and you've got to, as Scotty Bowman said again and again in his book, Scotty, the Ken Dryden book, great audio book if you're looking for something to listen to kill about 20 hours in the next few weeks. A team has to change. A team has to change. And the Oilers needed to change. And they had this young guy in Caleb Jones. And I thought he was going to be the guy. It turned out Well, it turns out he was one of the guys. They
Right.
brought in both him and Ethan Bear. And by the end of the year, I thought Caleb Jones was playing really well. I thought he was really doing well, and Ethan Bear was phenomenal
He was
all year
eating
long. I
Chris Russell's lunch by the end of the of time there.
I think it
And,
would have been a mistake, Bruce, in the playoffs
mhm,
to not play Jones.
mhm.
If you had to sit, if you're picking between Russell, and we could still have playoffs. If you're picking between Russell, Benning, and Caleb Jones, you got to play Jones. He's better than either of those guys. And Bruce, and of course, Bear was just sensational. And I just want to refer to our stats project on
Mhm.
Ethan Bear for a second. So I
Yep.
did a post myself recently where we looked
Right.
at, so when we break down scoring chances, we break it down into like what was the activity that the player did? Like was it a shot, a pass? And we differentiate in the shots. We include stretch passes. And a stretch pass leading to a grade A chance is that pass which creates an odd man rush essentially,
Right.
where defenseman busts it out and suddenly you got a 2-on-1 or a 3-on-2 or a 4-on-3
Mm.
because of that pass. And the Edmonton Oilers, who made the most of those kinds of passes at even strength last year, Ethan Bear with 21 of them.
No
And
doubt.
next best, Darnell
Mhm.
Nurse 9, or excuse me, Oscar Clefbaum with 11 of them, and Darnell Nurse with 9. So Bear essentially almost, he played more minutes than Clefbaum, but almost had twice as many than the next best guy. I mean, Ethan Bear was phenomenal at passing the puck all year long. I mean, I was hoping, and I mentioned this before, like, what the Oilers needed was that Duncan Keith, that guy who comes out of nowhere and is a top drawer defenseman. And Bruce, we have a couple candidates right now in Ethan Bear and Caleb Jones who have just played their first rookie years, who are going to still get better. They can get better to play. They're to be as good as Duncan Keith is a stretch, but those guys were damn good, and they're going to get better. And yeah,
Well,
making room for them was essential.
one of the things Holland said at his opening day presser, and you said on the podcast we did later that day, with approval and with my seconding of the motion, Holland saying how much he liked how he valued speed and puck movement on defense. He says we got to have guys who can move the puck on the blue line, and that's where Bear and Jones. That's the strength of their game. And even the other guy he brought in, Mike Green, that's the strength of his game. And
It was.
um, that's what Holland values. And if you look at the Oilers team this year, I think that was a significant difference of this year's team over the last, was their ability to get the hell out of their own end and control the puck more often. And Ethan Bear was a beauty. One thing about our stretch passes that I noticed that uh, like the traditional stretch pass, you think it's a long pass from inside the defensive zone to over the red line. That's usually what the commentators call it. But I thought our definition kind of morphed a little bit into a clean pass that breaks the play
Yeah,
open. And
yeah.
sometimes that pass wouldn't necessarily be that long, but it would be the one that moved the play to the next level from the defense to the forwards with the other team backpedaling, and if one of those forwards was named McDavid or Draisaitl, so much the better. And getting those guys the puck in full control while they're speeding through the neutral zone, that's golden. That's something the Oilers had to have it, and it was a big upgrade. And I mean, actually, that was the part of Sekera's game that wasn't bad, but I think bringing replacing him with a younger, improving young player is going to pay off in spades in the long run, and it paid off pretty well in the immediate short run.
And Caleb Jones led the team on a per minute basis in terms of getting outside shots on net, leading to grade A chances. So he had that ability to kind of walk the line or make a little move and get that shot on net that was either going to be tipped or be rebounded
Or
for a
screened.
chance, yeah, or screened. So Caleb Jones, he offered a lot as well. So I think they're both, man. You need, I think, at least 4 puck moving D in the NHL right now on your roster. And so, Bear, Clefbaum, Nurse, and Jones, I think, have to play in
Yep.
the playoffs.
So
All right.
what's your first good
This
move
is
or
the
good
one we
trade with Ken Holland?
this is the one that actually people have
This
been
is
kind of iffy on Ken Holland, Bruce. Also, there had been kind of a certain amount of iffiness. I think it's fair to say through July. It was kind of like, yeah, the
show
Broberg
me.
pick. Some people liked it, others didn't, and people were kind of some of the other moves they weren't sure, and not a lot had happened, frankly. I think the knee guard signing had happened by then, and people were thinking, "Oh, that's good." And I think maybe even had he signed Haas, I think by then.
Hmm.
Um, anyway, in mid-July, he pulled off the trade that just just there was an outpouring of joy in Edmonton. We were so tired of seeing Milan Lucic fail in Edmonton. And it wasn't just that he wasn't worth his $6 million salary in his last 2 years in Edmonton. It was that he was literally one of the worst forwards in the NHL at that point. And I'm not going to say how he did in Calgary. I don't care. Like, I have no idea. I didn't watch him play. But Ken Holland, in trading for James Neal, got out from under that no movement clause, Bruce. He traded a player who was too slow on a team that needed to get faster. Now, he brought in a player that wasn't a whole heck of a lot faster, but I think James Neal was a bit faster on the forecheck, more able to make things happen on the forecheck than Lucic. And according to the way that we rate players with our cult of hockey system, looking at their contributions to scoring chances for and against at even strength, James Neal was a significantly better even strength player than Milan Lucic was in his last 2 years in Edmonton. And it was a significant difference, quite a bit better. And James Neal was also really strong on the power play. He also has a contract, especially if he can play a few more years, like one more year. You don't have to protect him in the expansion draft. It's somewhat easier to buy out. So
Somewhat
um,
more worthwhile to buy out. I mean, it's the same basic equation as the Sekera buyout. You bite the bullet, you create room, you replace him with a cheaper player, and you got cap room. I'm not saying it's going to happen this summer, but I'm saying each summer they're going to have to revisit and say, is this the time to do that, or are we going to get value out of this guy? But with Lucic, I mean, that last year if they bought him out, they would have got 333,000 in cap space, meaning they could have replaced him with a guy at the NHL minimum, and they still would have lost money out of the equation in terms of what it made available. It was just absolutely insane how that contract was set up.
Bruce, I just want to go through some of the comments that were made the day of the trade, just because they still bring a smile to my face. And it's funny, often, if there's a really strong reaction to a trade, I've come to think often that reaction turns out to be fairly accurate.
Hmm.
And there certainly was on this one. So here's what ESPN's Greg Wyshynski, who is an Oilers critic through and through, here's what he said about the trade. Unless there's something we don't know about Neal, this is a coup for Ken Holland. Then the Athletics Dom Lucian said, both way overpaid and likely over the hill,
Yep.
but much prefer the bet on Neal over Lucic. And Dom was a very kind of smart hockey analytics guy, pretty savvy. Here's TSN's Craig Button on Neal. He's had one off season. I expect him to return to 20-goal form. Nailed it. Sammy Silber of the Sporting News. This deal can actually be considered a big win for the Oilers. Let's keep going here. For Oiler fans, this is from Kent Wilson, who I think used to write for The Athletic. I think he's retired now from blogging.
Oh yeah.
Kent Wilson wrote, for Oiler fans wondering, Neal was awful last year.
Hmm.
His relative impacts were worst on the team. Worst even strength points per 60 rate. He dragged out anyone he played with, scratched in final playoff game. Maybe he bounces back next year, but he was the Flames' worst regular skater. And I'm not going to quibble with people who watched Neal that year in Calgary. Kent Wilson, we heard this a lot. There was Dean Boomer Mulberg on Calgary radio, and he said of the trade, I was so sick of watching James Neal by the end. He was just done. The most bullish person on the whole trade was the cult of hockey's Kurt Levens, who said, it certainly appears that Ken Holland has acquired a legit top six winger. Actually, there might have been someone who was a little bit more excited. Copper and Blue blogger Jeff Chapman. He said, I love this one. No lie. This is the most excited I've been since the playoff run.
Wow.
And I'll tell you what, I felt pretty ecstatic myself, Bruce. I
I
was
can tell
ecstatic.
you the podcast that we did that day about that trade was the most popular college hockey podcast of all time, I believe.
Yes.
Certainly of the year. We had 125,000 views on YouTube, and so kind of not
Yeah.
quite an order of magnitude, but not often we get to six digits. I'll say that for a fact. And it was just people were just all over it and just thrilled that Lucic was gone. So yeah, I'd written a headline in June and my Lucic um, player review of the season, and I headlined it "Ken Holland's thorniest problem. What are the Oilers to do with Milan Lucic?" And a month later, he was gone. And wow, I mean, that was of all the long-term contracts that he inherited when he came to town. He didn't want to touch most of them because they were good contracts, but that was one that had to be dealt with in some manner, and he dealt with it. So credit where due to Ken Holland.
What is your second good move that you liked?
Well, I'm going to pick just because I like this player. Um, this free agent signing of Josh Archibald, uh, and it was one of a class of bets that Holland made throughout the even the spring and summer when he brought in Joachim Nygaard and Gaetan Haas from overseas and Thomas Yurcho from the AHL and Marcus Granlund and Josh Archibald and Riley Sheehan from the NHL. And basically $1 million each was the bet. And he basically promised all those guys a chance, and they all got a chance. Every one of those guys got double-digit games with the Oilers in 2019-20, a chance to prove their worth. In the case of Josh Archibald, some patience was required because he had an injury off the start, and it took him a while to find his niche. Let's put it that way. Other than right from the start, he and Sheehan and others were excellent on the penalty kill right out of the gate for Edmonton this year, and that was a big turnaround for the team, as I detailed in the last article about the season in review. The special teams made this Oilers team a successful one. Uh, and just Archibald was just one of those sort of smart bets on what Holland almost lovingly referred to as pros. Hockey guys that have been around 26, 27 years old, somewhere near their peak. They had enough experience that they knew what it took, but they weren't so long in the tooth that they couldn't win a race to the puck. And he went for speed. He identified team speed as being in need. He identified competitiveness as being in need. He identified secondary scoring as being in need. And Josh Archibald checked all of those boxes. And he also checked the shit out of the other team a lot. And for all that, I mean, he was about the most ferocious hitter on the team. Like, man, he would go after the biggest guy on the other team. I remember he took on that big Jordan Greenway from Minnesota Wild, the guy that weighs about 240 or something pounds, just a monster of a guy. And Archibald hit him so hard that he knocked him right out of the game. Clean check, just boom. The other guy outweighed him by something like 60 or 70 pounds. He hit Jamie Alexiak. He took a run at Jamie Alexiak, for goodness sake. So that was uh, he was one of the guys that just kind of put a little extra spirit into the team, I think. And was if you think of the guys that they had in those roles last year, Ty Ratty, Toby Reeder, uh, you're not thinking of expert penalty killers. You're not thinking of guys who stir things up with a check or a one race to an icing, you know, or a key defensive play with the other team's goalie out in the game on the line, which Archibald did several times, either by scoring into the empty net or by making a check or a deflecting a pass or something down the stretch. Like he became a player that Dave Tippett relied on, and he delivered the goods. So I like that move, and in the retrospect of what he eventually brought at the time, it just seemed like another pretty good bet. And I'd say this one paid off, and he extended him. So we got 2 more years of Josh Archibald to look forward to.
The old Oilers regime, Bruce, the old GMs previous to this would have their idea was to bring in Josh Archibald or Riley Sheahan, but the 30-year-old version of those players.
Right.
Like Eric Belanger at 32 or 33, Jared Smithson at 34, Boyd Gordon at 31 or whatever, Mark Letestu even at 20 to 30. Like just after, like a role player, you don't want to sign a role player after 30. I'm saying. These guys who've been role players, it hardly ever works out, and it never worked out with most of these guys in the Oilers. They finally are figuring, sign them when they're 26 or 27. Then keep them a couple years, and then let them go.
Yeah, well, Arch is my poster boy for that whole class of guys that Holland signed, and every last one of them, I think, was 26 or 27 years old.
Perfect
Maybe
age.
Sheahan is 28, but just right in there. They're pros. I mean, he's exactly right. Just sort of mid-career, low peak, but fairly reliable players that are anything in the $1 million range. I mean, that's a lot of money, but it's a value contract for a player who can deliver at even strength and one of the special teams. That's good value. So
and yes, they're pros. You could say, well, but they would say, well, Boyd, we're bringing in a pro like Boyd Gordon or Eric Belanger, but you want a pro and it's the peak of his hockey career, and for a checker, that's between about the ages of 25 and 28, right? Maybe 29.
Mm-hmm.
If you maybe will last till 30 after that. Like generally speaking, forget about it. Like,
well, yeah, I mean, there's a few.
Generally
Brodziak was good into his 30s, but by the time he got here,
he's another example of
he was done. Yeah. Oh yeah.
They just always get them when they're past their best before date, and this haunted the Oilers, and they couldn't seem to find him. And Holland, he made so many of these bets, and some of them worked out. So good for him. I'm kind of torn on my next one, Bruce. Like my next guy for the next best move. Okay. So I'm gonna go with Mike Smith. Okay. When they signed him, he was definitely in the coin flip variety of like, is this going to work out or not? Old goalie, and you could probably make an argument that it didn't work out if you look at his save percentage. It was just 902, I think. So you could, I'm sure someone could look at the numbers and say, well, that's actually didn't work out that well. But Bruce, he had 19 wins and 19 losses. And in the NHL, those are 19 real wins. That'll get you in the playoffs. Being real 500 will, generally speaking, get you in the playoffs. So Mike Smith was a playoff caliber goalie, signed on the cheap to back up Mikko Koskinen. Seemed to have great chemistry with Koskinen to the extent that Koskinen's puck moving improved as well. I just loved watching Mike Smith in net most of the year. It was always thrilling. He was so fiery, so passionate. I didn't like him when the other team had a breakaway. He seemed to be particularly inept at stopping those kinds of things. But otherwise, and he obviously had a terrible spell of play in December. Starting in November.
A lot of them, yeah.
But he also had he had a strong spell in October, and then in the last 2 months of the season, he was really good. So a lot to like there, Bruce. He really gave the team, I think, some fire, personality, and some solid goaltending. And by the end, when he was in net took me a while to get over the his bad play in December. But by the end, in February, I was thinking I was kind of excited to see him in net again, and he expecting that he would do well, and he did well. Good for you, Mike Smith. And it's a coin flip who's going to start in the playoffs. Koskinen has slightly better numbers. But if you're playing a team that dumps the puck in a lot, man, you put Mike Smith in net. That's for sure, because he'll crush that team.
Yeah, well, he had a .915 save percentage on the penalty kill. And he and Koskinen were a big part of the reason why that penalty kill did so well. I mean, for all that you look at the unit in front of them, but the fact is that of regular NHL goalies that played 25 plus games, which is the usual qualifying line. Mind you, of course, some of them were probably close and didn't quite get there, but there was, I think, 52 goalies that played 25 games. Six of them had a save percentage above 900 on the penalty kill, and two of them played for the Oilers. So that's a big part of the reason the PK was as strong as it was.
All right, Bruce, what is your move that you didn't like?
Oh, that's going to win me lots of friends. Uh, the Zack Kassian contract extension. What I didn't like about it was the timing of it. And in retrospect, I'm starting to think maybe there's a reason I didn't like that because it was a bit premature. Kassian he had a super calendar 2019. He was promoted by Ken Hitchcock onto the first line in January of 2019. And for all 12 months, right through the end of December, he played well on that line, mind you, with McDavid and typically and Draisaitl. But he scored. He scored 26 goals, 24 assists in that time, 50 points, obviously. Almost all of it at even strength. And he did other things that won him fans. Of course, he was the big hitter, and on games when he was skating well, he looked like, well, $3 million. But he started 2020 and it kind of was in a slump, and then he got into that silly game in Calgary where Matt Tkachuk ran him three times, and he lost his cool in the middle of them and laid a beating on Tkachuk that probably felt good to people watching. In fact, I know it did. And yet at the same
No problem, Bruce. There's no probablys about this. Okay,
and yet at the same time, that was a costly penalty in which Calgary scored the game-winning goal on the power play in a one-goal regulation Calgary win in the game for first place. And Kassian got suspended. And this weird thing happened that while he was suspended, uh, there grew this huge groundswell of love for Kassian in Edmonton. And it was like it just became this tide, and Holland got caught in and thought, oh, now's the time. We got to strike while the iron's hot, get this guy under control. And they wound up giving a 4-year extension, $3.2 million, and it's a lot of money unless the guy's a first liner. And I mean, he's been a first liner in Edmonton for exactly 1 year, 2019, out of all the time that he's been here. Otherwise, he spent a lot of time, on Mark Letestu's line, and uh, he does have value. Don't get me wrong. I just think the price point was high and the time period was long, and unfortunately, the fullness of time. This is the kind of player that would have the value would have gone down on him on the free agent market this summer, just the way things have transpired. And obviously, there was no way to foresee that. But
yeah,
I'm just saying, waiting and taking a little closer to the end probably was the move. And anyway,
yeah. Well, everyone's going to get a lot less
it's
money.
just an Abdelkader deal, but it's only for 4 years instead of 7. So there's that.
Yeah, I think he's a better. I don't know enough about Justin Abdelkader to comment.
He had a great year playing with Datsuk and Zetterberg, and he got paid, which is not too different from having a great year playing with McDavid and Draisaitl, from where I sit. Wish
it had been 3 years. 3 years at the same money would have been fine. 4 years is a year too long, probably. He's obviously a player who needs some management, right? He's an up and down player. He played really well, Bruce, this year. His scoring chances plus minus that we track was really strong,
especially in the first half. Yeah,
especially in the first half. But he never became a sieve on defense. He was always a useful player when he got back in there, and I think his game was starting to round into shape again. And in the playoffs, I think we're going to be really glad in years to come with Zack Kassian in the playoffs, Bruce. So we'll see about that contract. I'm a little less
He's 29, right? That's the thing. Like his
Yeah,
fourth year,
that's
he'll
the
be
thing, eh?
30,
Right? Like,
32, and
didn't I just get off saying you should never sign that kind of player when they
yeah.
like this is the contract you're going to regret? You're probably right.
So I mean, I that and that being said, the fact that I'm pulling that one out of my rear end is the thing that I didn't like. Says that there's not a big long list of things I hate that Ken Holland did. Right? He didn't trade for Brandon Manning. He didn't trade away Ryan Strome. You know, he didn't do all those things. Uh, uh, so I mean, that's a sign of success when your bad move is still defensible, at least to a degree.
Well,
That
here's yeah, here's
it's
mine. It
not
was
Lucic. He didn't give him 6 million for 7 years, right?
and
So
mine isn't exactly trading for Griffin Reinhardt here. It's which I always feel justified in bringing up because I never liked that trade.
well, I know you
Okay.
did.
I bring it up every chance I get. All
I
right.
know you
Okay. Here's the move I didn't like. I didn't like the Mike Green trade.
do. Hmm.
I mean, I don't like the idea of I just think you got Caleb Jones, you got Matt Benning, you got Russell, you're seven deep on defense. Where does Green fit in? Like Bruce, I think I did the numbers. Like in terms of power play numbers the last couple of years for an NHL defenseman, he's one of the weakest power play defensemen in the NHL. He does not look to me. I think this was a trade of a GM remembering a player, being attached to a player. If it's just the depth move, I'm cool with that. If it's just like in case so and so gets hurt and then another guy gets hurt and then another guy gets hurt and you need someone. But if they're going to play Mike Green ahead of any of those other three guys, Benning, Jones, or Russell, I am not in favor of that at all. To me, and in what I saw in the brief time he played with the Oilers, was a guy who was a step behind. And I'll tell you what, I listened to the Wings in Motion podcast recently
Wow.
and I wrote a post about Andreas Athanasiou
Right.
based on that. And they were really pretty bullish on Athanasiou and
Hmm.
not liking to see him go. And it reminded me of one of those trades like the Oilers always used to make, where there'd be like some 26, 27-year-old guy who was pretty damn good, but kind of things had gone sour a bit, but they trade him,
Hmm.
we regretted it almost every time. It's like the Cogliano trade or the Glenn Cross losing Glenn Cross, that kind of thing, where that's how Detroit fans felt about Athanasiou. But with Mike Green, the quote was from one of the bloggers was on this podcast was, for those of for those of us who have seen Mike Green play hockey this year and last, I don't think he's worth a fourth round pick. And that's the only comment that they didn't dwell on the trade. But man, these Bruce, and it was three guys on this podcast, a variety of opinions. They watched him play. They've
Hmm.
watched him play every day for a few years now, right? They know
Right.
Mike Green like we do not know him. They saw him play, and they did not see a player of any value, any real value. So again, if this is a depth move, I'm
Right.
completely okay with that. But if there is a playoffs, and I see Mike Green starting ahead of Caleb Jones, for instance,
Hmm.
or Matt Benning, or Chris Russell, I'm just gonna like, what is going on? And I didn't like that move for that
He
reason.
starts
So maybe
ahead of
that's more on
Chris.
Tippett than on Holland, but I don't know.
He starts
Maybe
ahead of Chris Russell. Maybe the Oilers are going to move the puck better in that game.
no, I don't think
Yeah.
much.
Okay.
Honestly, I
We'll
think
wait.
Green is in the, I don't know, like the Ryan Whitney in 2012-13 stage of his career.
The
Like,
nautical twilight phase. He's yeah. I mean, he's expensive is the other thing. But I mean, Holland did two things there to limit the damage on the payroll, which he didn't have much to work with. He did get Detroit to retain the full 50%, and he
mhm.
also got Detroit to take the Kyle Brodziak contract in return,
Yes,
which
yeah,
Brodziak was on LTIR, and that was 1.15 million. So basically, between those two things, I cut Green's effective rate from being like 5.3, almost 5.4 million, down to about 1.5. So basically, they, they got him from the old Andrej Sekera contract to the new Andrej Sekera contract just by those machinations. So Holland at least, cut the costs that way, but the fourth round pick is gone. and unfortunately, the player didn't even finish his second game before he got racked up on a knee-on-knee
Yeah,
hit. That was
yeah. It
shit.
it just I just had a flashback to when Glenn Sather and Al Hamilton's last year when he was playing, I think effectively with one eye, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep.
He would often play Hamilton ahead of Risto Siltanen, and it
Hmm.
would drive me it drove me crazy. And I started to develop a dislike for Hamilton, which wasn't fair, right? Because he was
Hmm.
an old warrior on the Oilers, but
Wasn't his fault.
well, and playing Green ahead of these other guys wouldn't be Green's fault, but I hope I don't see that either. Okay, Bruce, what's your number?
I'm going to go with the number 12 because it splits nicely into three. If you look at the roster report from Game 82 of last year, which is the last game Edmonton played before Ken Holland took over, there's 20 players who played in that game, the 3-1 win over Calgary, where McDavid got racked up. That's what everybody remember about that game. And four guys that were injured and unable to play. And out of those 24 players, 12 are on the current Oilers, and 12 are not. And conversely, on the current Oilers, the team that played Game 71 this year against Winnipeg, they also had, of course, 20 guys dressed for that game, and they had four guys on the shelf as well. So they had the 12 holdovers plus 12 new guys. So basically, Holland cleaned out half of the team and replaced it. So he said the day that he took over the team that he was going to find some of his solutions internal and some external. And man, he seems to have kept to that word both on the ice and in various departments of suits in the team. So he basically changed out. Now of the 12, of course, some of them remain in the organization in the minors, and some of them were in the organization and came up from the minors. So it's not like he brought in 12 completely new players, but from the perspective of the Edmonton Oilers team, basically half of it has been refreshed in 10, 11 months.
This is a good team, Bruce, and with good goaltending, it's a really good team. It is a really good team if they could get good goaltending, and it's a really good team uh, because he just answered so many questions about it this year, and especially bringing in these young guys. So, okay, my number is 920. 920. You okay? You got the mute button on? Good
I
work.
did, I thought.
Yeah, you did.
Good.
That worked
First time I
perfectly.
used it.
Yeah. Well, when you choke on your whiskey.
Contussion, man. I got a little bit too much in that little gulp.
Okay. My number is 920. That's Mike Smith's save percentage for 15 games in January and February. Now, of course, when you do these numbers are always misleading because you kind of cherry pick it. Like you go to his last bad game and you start it, you end it before his most recent bad game. So there's three games at the end there where he was not so good. He had in his last three games, Smith's save percentage was 900, 810, and 875. And in the games before that, his save percentage, well, just the five games before, 864, 769, 840, 857, and 885. So, but nonetheless, 15 games. It's a lot of games.
Mm.
920 save percentage, Bruce. So that's when my heart warmed up towards Mike Smith. That was a heck of a run. He had 11 wins and 4 losses. That was so crucial for the Oilers season that he step it up, and he did. He did. So
Yeah,
good for you.
the
Good for
season
Mike Smith.
turned in early January, and he was one of the movers and shakers that helped to key that
Yeah.
change. I mean, Kyle
Yamamoto.
Yamamoto
Yeah.
obviously was a big part of it, and um, so I mean, if I were to look at how Holland dealt with the young players, where he basically brought him in sort of slowly. He brought in, well, Bear obviously started the season. Jones came up mid-November. Yamamoto came up in late December. Each of those guys wound up making an impact on the team. Benson came up a little bit later than that and got a look, but he wasn't quite ready yet. But there seemed to be some sort of systematic introduction, and I think maybe this is a move that maybe I should have mentioned earlier, but uh, after the holiday roster freeze, the season was exactly half over, and that was the time when uh, Holland made his move and he waived Brandon Manning and he waived Marcus Granlund and he brought up two young guys, Kyle Yamamoto and William Lagesson, and so it was like it was a plan. Half the season in the minors, and then we're gonna see where we're at and change things up. And Lagesson didn't make a big difference. I don't think getting rid of Manning hurt them any. And the Yamamoto shot in the arm was just a huge thing. I mean, he doesn't get credit for the player, but I think he should get credit for his handling of the player.
Bruce, did you just sneak in another good thing
I
there?
did.
Okay, good work. All right, let's leave it there, Bruce. Thanks for talking tonight.
Yeah, thanks for listening, everyone.
And in the meantime, and in between times, this has been another edition of the Cult of Hockey podcast.